Well, first of all, I want to certainly welcome everybody to my presentation here today. I think you'll find it interesting, and I want to thank Balchem for the opportunity to be on this rather fascinating webinar presentation to share the stage with other speakers as well. It was a pleasure to meet with you at your reception and meet at your meet and greet, and a very impressive group at that point as well. So I think we're ready to rock and roll here today. If you got your ears on, we should hopefully go to my PowerPoint, and we should be off and running at this point. So I think do I need to trigger that, or will someone else trigger my PowerPoint? Oh, I got to get rid of me. At this point, you'll shrink me. Okay, I think we are ready to go. And my title for today is Maximizing Dairy ROI at this point. And certainly we know that that's going to be an important factor as we get going through our program here today. Let's do some definitions. ROI stands for return on investment. Simply means that if I'm going to invest into a product or technology, I expect to get 5, 6, 10, 20% return on my investment. Another term we use is show me the money. My dairymen say, I will look at that if you can show to me there is going to be a positive return. Of course, another thing that will come up is many livestock enterprises, they see that as a value added. In other words, they are taking their crops they're raising on their farms and adding value to it rather than sell the crop directly. And then finally, another one that will pop up in my discussion is a benefit to cost ratio. We like to see that over 2 to 1, which means that if I'm going to invest 8 cents into a product, I'd like to get at least 16 cents or euro equivalent back on that product as well. So certainly we all know, because of COVID-19 and just dairy in general, that change is happening and happening very rapidly. And so we hopefully will be able to answer some questions that may relate to these changes that we're seeing in the dairy industry in the US, in Europe, and around the world. This is not big news that you can see, but certainly milk prices have really gyrated in 2020. This shows you December of a year ago, and this last December. Listed here is milk prices, both in terms of kilos of fat and kilos of protein, and you can see tremendous variation. And certainly that impacts the check and what some of the decisions being made on dairy farms. Not only do we have a milk change, we also see changes in value of other factors that influence the ROI. The first one in the US is right now close-up heifers, typically within 60 days of calving, is under $1,300. However, if you look at Wisconsin budgets, that it's cost over $2,000 to feed, maintain, interest, return, death loss, all those factors in. So the point is, this is not a profit center. Another problem is our cow prices are modestly low at this point. So that de-incentivizes or decreases the interest of selling surplus cows. And that's a problem right now. The US dairy industry's herd size is increasing, and we have 3% more milk now than we had a year ago. And that's a lot of extra milk that has to find a home. And the third factor I show on this PowerPoint is the value of bull calves. Right now, Holstein bull calves are under $100, and Holstein heifers are half that price. I can remember years ago that they were worth about 4 times the price. And so basically all these economic factors come into play when farmers are making decisions on their dairy farms. So much like Dr. Santos, we are going to look at these 3 points today in the next 35 minutes as far as that goes. And we're going to look at the impact of transition management on ROI. And we are also going to be looking at the relationship of peak milk and components and its impact on ROI, and then find out just a few comments on calf management as it relates to the return on investments as well. So let's begin with our first one, and that is look at transition cows. And of course, a lot of interest because obviously we have lots of products that can impact the transition cow health. So we're going to have 3 polling questions. Here's your first one. And it says, and you can vote on this, and the poll is now open, which one, you only get to pick one, transition area is most critical to your clientele that you work with here. And by the way, these are all correct answers. Number 1, focus on a fresh cow group. Number 2, minimize metabolic disorders. Thirdly, focus on a close-up group or strategy if you wish. And finally, optimize body condition score. So the polls are now open and hopefully you're voting feverishly. You all know that we did a lot of voting in the US here in November, and we will just leave that alone unless you want to talk about it in the Q&A. So I think we will go ahead and show the results, and hopefully they will pop up on the screen so you and I can see them all at the same time. And it looks like I've got to do something here to see the results as well. So we're going to open that screen up and hopefully see the results coming down here. Okay, interesting results. To me, 10% of you have selected focus on fresh cows. I agree with that. 49, half of you said minimizing metabolic disorders. Great choice. 31 said focus on close-up dry cows, and 10% body condition score. And so I think it's interesting to see what these results were. And I probably would have voted, and you aren't going to agree with me, we're really looking at body condition score. We're just seeing some real opportunities that we can manipulate body condition score. All 4 of them obviously are very important as well. Okay, I think we are set to move forward, and I may have to click on a screen here, and away we go. Here are some metabolic expenses, and Dr. Santos showed those to you, or certainly one of our previous speakers, I think it was Tanya, showed that there is a real cost. No question there's a cost with it. This would be in euros, of course. I don't have a euro sign on my PowerPoint, but you have this data in your handouts as well. So these really cost money. So that's why half of you selected this. There is a lot of money laying on the table, and you can go and read these. You heard them, saw them a bit earlier. DA is very expensive here. So certainly metabolic expenses are going to be a real risk to ROI out here in the program. Then you have to have goals, and these are mine. Talking with producers, looking at some of the research, the question, what's normal? Where should we be? So milk fever, you can see 3%. We're saying it's very typical. In fact, some of our herds now with the technologies you'll see in a bit later will get this number down to basically less than 1% or almost non-existent. Clinical ketosis, 2%. DAs, displaced abomasums, about 5%, and retained placentas around 8%. We'll try to talk a little slower. As you notice, I can talk 600 words a minute. So we need to slow down a little bit so that you can hopefully stay with me. But I think every producer should have this chart, or at least what is your goals, and then next, what is the level in the herd that he is working with or she's working with on their facilities. I think it's very important to have, and I think Dr. Santos did an excellent job. We know liver health is critical. And at this point, as we talk to our dairy farmers, we know liver becomes important because it converts propionate and lactate to blood glucose. And in some cases, I think glucose becomes a very rate-limiting nutrient for our dairy cows in early lactation. We also know liver is important to convert blood ammonia to blood urea nitrogen, obviously to avoid changes in pH. Dr. Santos showed very eloquently that a liver moderates the levels of circulating nephos in the bloodstream. And then you can see a new term that I'm looking at, and that is negative energy balance, maybe negative glucose balance. And we know glucose is critical for ovarian function, the immune system, and of course for milk yield, because obviously we need a source of glucose to produce lactose and control milk volume. So certainly that liver is really important, as we see on dairy farms, that is at an optimal performance level. Well, you saw this slide earlier, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on it. I think what's really important is to see that feeding for just the 42 days, the 21 days prepartum to 21 days postpartum, you can see a very nice response as presented by the meta-analysis here mentioned earlier. What's impressive to me, however, is the carryover effect that has through the entire lactation, even though we're only feeding it for basically for 42 days. And it drives home the other important point, and that is that once you and I establish a lactation curve, if our management and nutrition programs are up to snuff, we will hold that curve. And that has some real economic impacts you'll see here a bit later as well. Here are all the different studies, and the meta-analysis does it much better. I did not have access to that, but Dr. Santos showed that to you, that there are lots of studies out there, and these are just kind of a bar graph illustration of the various responses, from the very high ones to, yes, a few of them that do not show any responses. And now, after today's discussion, you should be able to answer why we may not have seen, or why we saw such a great response to the rumen protected products in the transition diets. So certainly I thought, when we look at transition diets, I also want to touch on hypocalcemia, one that's really important here in the US. Dr. Gary Etzel would suggest that in excess of 30% of multi-pairs cows will have low blood calcium, and that cost in euros is $125 per cow per incident. The cut point varies from university and research groups, but typically in that 8 to 8.2 milligrams per deciliter. And so you might ask, well, really, why is blood calcium so important? And we know it has impact on uterine contraction and uterine tone, which has impacts on birthing, retained placenta, and metritis. Digestive tract, especially effects on displaced abomasum and dry matter intake, which is so critical. And then some interesting earlier work done by Missouri on some impacts on the teat and sphincter. That's our first barrier in terms of a bacteria infiltration into the mammary gland. So this data comes from Wisconsin, and the yellow bar that just pop up, that's going to be our calving window. That cut point and the terms did not transfer in this slide when I got it from Wisconsin, but that's 8.2 milligrams per deciliter. So there's your cut point, and your red curve that's snaking across your PowerPoint right now. Those are cows with milk fever. And so you can see a dramatic drop in blood calcium, typically around under 5 milligrams per deciliter in those cows. But here comes the green one, and there's your hypocalcemia. And so you can see that these cows, much like the dry matter that Dr. Santos talked about, we see that dropping off on blood calcium as well. These cows need help, and this has a major impact on the dairy farm. Dr. Etzel's group, published in the Journal of Dairy Science, cited these things that will happen in those cows that have subclinical hypocalcemia, especially in multi-lactation cows. And so you can see that we get an increase, about 3.2 times greater risk of metritis, an increase in postpartum fever, 2.4x, the increase in beta hydroxybutyric acid, and longer median days open, which means we delay the next lactation. So certainly that hypocalcemia has some pretty big hitters when it comes to certainly reproductive performance and metabolic effects as well. What really impresses me, though, is the second bullet point, and that it has an impact on immune suppression associated with hypocalcemia. And most of us would suggest that even our transition cows are somewhat immunosuppressed to begin with, due to hormonal changes and diet shifts that are occurring as well. And you can see the two bullet items published in this journal article is a reduction in neutrophil concentration. So we have few of those neutrophils out there to attack, if you want to call this like an army. And second of all, the ability of those neutrophils to undergo phagocytosis of the bacteria and oxidative burst is also reduced. So I think this whole area of immunity in transition cows is just a huge factor as we go forward here in the future. We have two tools that we like to see farmers utilize here in Illinois. The first one is the anionic products. And of course, we're talking DCAD, a dietary cation anion difference. Some people will call it dietary cation balance, same term. And normally we're targeting our diets to be somewhere between a -50, yes, it's a -50 to a -100 milliequivalents per kilogram. The tool that we like to use on farms to be sure it's working properly is urine pH. The numbers we are targeting in Holstein, 6.0, Jersey cows, 5.5. And generally, when we are feeding these DCAD products, we are increasing the level of calcium. And now you'll see some politics on that here in just a minute. Another tool that seems to be working very well for us, and that is calcium supplementation right at calving. And in most cases, that's going to be a bolus. Some cases, it's a paste, or in some cases, it may be a drenching product. We're looking at giving to these cows an extra 50 to 60 grams of what we call bioavailable calcium per treatment. And those products typically are calcium chloride, a calcium sulfate, calcium propionate, meaning the calcium is quite available compared to, say, limestone. Limestone, according to some research from Kansas State, may also have some effects on the DCAD as well. And we'd like to see this every 12 hours. Now, I list 12 to 24 hours because on many farms, cows can only be restricted or able to be treated every once a day. The reason I say every 12 hours, the data is fairly clear that these cows will metabolize those 50 or 60 grams in the first 6 or 8 hours after supplementation occurs. Here comes the 4 programs that we see here in Illinois. Let's stay with the green one. Hopefully it's green on your chart. That's basically NRC. And so that's the normal level of 50 to 60 grams of calcium in the close-up dry program. We would probably bump that up maybe about another 10 grams without DCAD. Then we're going to go to the right, and then we call that the partially acidified. And it's called partially acidified because the urine pH will be somewhere between 6 and 7. And doing that, we will then have total calcium in the diet around 100 to 125 grams. So we're increasing that 30 or 40 grams of calcium in the feeding in the program. Then we go to fully acidified, which means it's the higher level of these products, and that will take the urine pH down in that 5 to 6 range. And now the calcium level goes up because research from Illinois indicates there's extra calcium being excreted by the kidney. So certainly that becomes a factor. So you'll see different arguments by different companies on what level of calcium we should have in the base diet. Then let's look way over on the left side on my screen, which is kind of a maroon color. And basically we're going to make these cows calcium deficient. And of course, a product that's coming out of Northern Europe or Denmark primarily is using one of the zeolite products. And there's interest in the US of doing that as well. A more expensive program, a little different strategy here, more research being done to see what the long-term effects that may have, but certainly that's another approach as well. So certainly you'll see those 4 choices there. I'll tell you my bias, and you'll see it all through this presentation. A lot of the stuff is Hutjens bias. We're on the right side. In other words, we're going fully acidified because it gives me a little bit more wiggle room if potassium levels start shifting in the forage program and I don't fall out of the optimal range to get my benefits on the blood calcium numbers. So we have other tools as well out there for heavy cows, and I just had to put this in because we're really seeing, and I think if I had given this talk, for example, 5 years ago, that might be 3.5. 10 years ago, that might have been 3.75. So we continue to ratchet down the body condition score. And the good news that Dr. Santos shows that the rumen protected choline is basically not related to body condition score. And that really makes sense. I really enjoy that part of the presentation. So what are some of the tools that you and I can look at to give our some protection? So we already saw the information on rumen protected choline. That's, to me, I call that liver protection. Organic chromium, which is now allowed in the US, that is an organic chromium source, and that will help increase glucose and insulin response in my cows. Propylene glycol is a tool to be used on those cows that are running with higher levels of BHBA, and of course that's a glucose precursor, and glycerol can be used as well. Monensin or essential oils appears that these are going to have some impact on propionate production in the rumen, may lower blood ketone levels, a protein sparing effect, and eventually, as mentioned earlier by one of our speakers, that's going to have some impact also on greenhouse gases. And then the rumen protected niacin looks to be a wonderful tool for some of those really heavy cows to try to reduce body fat mobilization. So we have some tools that dairy farmers can look at depending on what's happening in their farms and under their cows. So let's summarize the first part of the talk, and that is a return on investment in transition cows. Number one, I got optimal dry matter intake, especially in the close-up pen, and that's going to be a real challenge. And that is where some of the Goldilocks or the low energy diets have come into play. One thing that we've done is we've actually indicated maybe spiking that up a little bit higher in nutrients, especially metabolizable protein, like 1,200 to 1,300 grams of going into those cows. Number two, splitting the groups into far off and close up. And if your farms in Europe are too small for this, then I suggest you have to target the close-up group nutrient guidelines, which means more metabolizable protein. My feed additives come into play at this point, and of course, it increases my total cost a bit, but I do not want to jeopardize my close-up cows here. Some of my farms that are smaller in Illinois, they will use what we call a close-up top dress. So they have the ability to give this extra feed, 1 or 2, 3 kilogram package to the far off dry cow program to get some extra nutrients to those cows. You just got to have a fresh cow ration. And I think some of you voted for that. I think that's really important. I also say a fresh cow approach that also could be done with a top dressing program. And it's really critical because I need to determine if my cows are healthy. Are they able then to move into the next ration or the next group or wherever those fresh cows are going to go? And most of those fresh cow diets are 10 to 21 days in length. Certainly, another critical factor is controlling body condition score. And in many cases, this goes back away to the previous lactation in cows that were in a one group TMR and could not get pregnant in a timely fashion. And as a result, they have gone up to 3.5, 3.75. And then, of course, we stress the importance of blood calcium. And then finally, healthy liver, healthy cows. So certainly that would be my take-home messages for you to think about here today. Moving on to phase number 2, peak milk and milk components. And again, you'll see there is a what's happening here. We again have another polling question. So get ready to vote again, you liberals and conservatives. Whatever hat you're wearing here today, you have 4 choices. Which area is which important to you and your clients? Optimizing peak milk production is one choice. Number 2, building levels of milk protein. The level of milk fat, this is usually kilograms per cow per day on both of those, and calculating feed efficiency. So which one are you going to vote for? And again, I would suggest that all 4 are good answers. Right now, our milk protein is over $3 a pound. So you can see in excess of $6 per kilogram of the protein. And attendees, half of you said optimize peak milk production. Bingo, that's a great one. Building milk protein 10% in the US, that's a hot topic right now based on some discussions we have with our producers. Building milk fat, some of you say that, and about, 2 years ago, when fat was worth $3 a pound, that was a hot ticket item and everybody was looking for milk fat. And then a lot of you had calculating feed efficiency. So very good choices. Like I said, I'm not sure we have any really right ones or wrong ones at this stage of the game. So we're going to go and move forward then, and hopefully everything is going to work for me okay, and we'll close that off, and I think we will be set to go here. And there we go. After the third one, guys and gals, this will be a charm. So I'm going to talk about what I call lactation curve rules. Everybody has rules. And the first one is that you only get one chance to set peak milk. So we have to make sure we get that job done, because you'll see, as illustrated here in Dr. Santos' presentation, that becomes critical, especially with the rumen protected choline product. We also know that high producing cows are most efficient in terms of feed efficiency and profitability. And my bottom line, some of you will smile, and that is I never give up milk. And the reason I say that is for 1 kilogram of dry matter would cost me 26 cents in Illinois here today. It's gone up a bit because our corn price is $5.40 a bushel. 1 kilogram of dry matter can support 2 kilograms of milk, or slightly more depending on milk components. That's worth 76 cents when I have my current milk price in Illinois. So the profit for each kilogram of what I'm calling marginal dry matter intake, guys and gals, that's that last mouthful that those cows are going to consume. That's going to be a profit margin is 50 cents per cow per day, and that's with a 26 cents investment. Wow, wouldn't you like to do that in the stock market? That's a return on investment of almost 200%. So certainly a big factor. Now, this is a very busy slide. You are going to have to look to the right side. This is in kilograms for our European people. For some of us in the US, it's on pounds on the left side. This data comes from our Raleigh, North Carolina processing center. And at the bottom, you can see there are over 4,000 herds summarized in 2017. Now, it's a busy slide, but let me tell you what's going on. What a powerful slide. You can see with lactation numbers, first lactation, second, and third, and greater. And then we have 4 different levels of milk production, all the way from 8,600 kilos all the way up to 13,000 kilograms of milk yield. I hope I said 8,000 versus 13,000. And so you can see, look where the peak milk is. There's no question peak milk is really important. And you can then look at a ratio, and you can see that these ratios change on first, second, and third lactation cows. You simply divide the peak milk into the milk yield. And then you've got lactation in terms of the first 40 days. That's your fresh cow pen, your early lactation cows. Then you got 40 to 100, 1 to 200, and 200 to 300. And so the power of that part of the curve is, do the cows stay on the curve they started out with? Or I call that curve jumping. In other words, they start out milking like a 10,000 kilo cow, and then when lactation ends up, they jumped up to 12,000 liter, which means what? We missed the true peak on these cows. Early lactation cows, we had a problem. So a powerful data set that allows you to answer the question based on that level of production, Holsteins, and we have this for jerseys if you'd like to have it, we can get that provided for you. It says, do I get the right peak on my cows relative to the herd average and the age of the cows or lactation number? And then it says peak milk in the right days. Let's go back. If you look at 40 to 100 days in milk, in all these different herds, that is when the true peak is occurring. Heifers tend to be about 30 or 40 days slower or later than older cows, but certainly peak milk will occur in that time period. So powerful data set to answer the question, what is that lactation curve looking like? Certainly manipulating milk components can really be important. In some cases in New Zealand and Canada, they really don't want all that volume. They really want the components, milk and fat, to make product there. Most of the US dairy farms are on we call component-based pricing, which means my milk check this month will be based on how many kilograms of fat, kilograms of true protein, and kilograms of other solids I am selling to my milk processor or co-op. And in some cases, in Mexico, for example, when there is a fluid milk-based source, then there is no value for protein. So the answer changes a little bit depending on your market, your quota, and other factors in the marketplace. Well, now you should say, we've seen this one before. You're right, but here comes the components. And so it's the same format. You'll notice way on the far right side, there are your kilograms a day that you can look at. On the left side, of course, it would be the pounds equivalent. Again, first, second lactation, same number of days of milk. Look at this, guys and gals. Take a look at fat. You look at our lower producing herds, they are significantly lower in fat content in the first 100 days. And the question is why? And I'm not sure. That could be dry matter intake. That could be metabolic disorders. That could be competition at the feed bunk. Who knows? Could be ration for all I know at this point. But there's an opportunity there. But now look over to the right side. There's your milk protein. And this just surprised me that you can see in the first 100 days, all the true milk, and by the way, this is true milk protein. If your marketplace is total protein, add roughly 0.2 of a point to each of these numbers to adjust for that differential there. But look at that. And what are we talking about for benchmarks? Well, for Holsteins, we should be about 3.1 true protein, which would be about 3.3 total protein. And you can see at all herds, in the first 100 days, we are leaving significant protein on the table at a time where we're getting optimal and peak milk production. So is there an opportunity? Is there an opportunity out there? Our milk fat levels would be about 3.8 to 3.9, just to give you European colleagues an idea what is, quote, normal for Holstein cows and what's happening in the first 100 days. Really an interesting set of data. So now let's take a quick look, 39% if my memory is correct, and that's not always good. I'm getting old. I'm looking at feed efficiency. And we define feed efficiency as kilograms of 3.5 fat-corrected milk or energy-corrected milk divided by the kilograms consumed. And you'll notice it's in red because we do not count the weigh back. It's only the feed that cows actually consume. So if you look on the right side of the PowerPoint, you can see, example, a group of cows, a herd of cows averaging 30 kilograms of 3.5 fat-corrected milk divided by 20 kilograms of dry matter. We've got a 1.5 feed efficiency per kilogram of dry matter. So a very good number, by the way. If you then look to the left side, here are some guidelines we provide to our dairy farmers. And you can see the high group cows usually are in that 1.7 to 1.8. So they are very efficient converting feed dry matter to milk production. Generally, if you have a heifer group or first lactation group, they're down about 1/10 of a point because some of those nutrients are being diverted to growth and reaching mature size. And if they're doing a poor job of raising heifers, this number can be down around 1.5 in this example. Low groups, 1.2, 1.3, a one group TMR, 1.5. And if you're under 1.3, wow, I have to ask some tough questions because you are really getting a poor return on your feed investment. This is a nice table that comes from The Ohio State University that might be even more useful for you. You'll notice the kilos in the brown colored column, the second one from the left. And so you can see that if you're averaging 30 kilograms of dry matter, feed efficiency about 1.38. If you go down to 34 kilograms, 1.5 or 1.49, and your very elite herds at 40 kilos of milk a day, that group or those cows should be at 1.63. So again, a nice way to dial in. And that's my whole presentation for you today, is give you some benchmarks I use to dial in these herds. Now, why is that important on ROI? Well, let's look at economics of feed efficiency. So now you can see I'm taking a standard set of 31.8 kilograms of milk, and I'm going to charge today's feed price, Illinois, at 26 cents per kilogram of dry matter. I'll let you make the euro conversions at your leisure. I knew I'd mess that up if I tried doing that. So take a look at this. If my feed efficiency on a farm in Europe is 1.3 kilograms of energy corrected milk per kilogram of dry matter, those cows are eating 24.5 kilograms a day. If you can figure out how to move that up from 1.3 to 1.4, that means I get that same level of milk, but now instead of eating 24 kilos, they're eating basically 22.7. That difference is 47 cents a cow a day. That's a huge number. Just think that through. Most of you in Europe are going to be in that latter category. You're going to be at 1.4. If I can go up to 1.5, how are you going to do that? Well, that could be Reassure. It could be a feed additive. It could be a feeding program. It could be a housing situation. Getting cows pregnant, reducing mastitis. The list goes on. You know what that number is. But look at, there we are again. Another 39 cents laying on the table. So some real opportunities to get return on investments in terms of feed efficiency on dairy farms. I thought I'd show this data set. It's an interesting one by Dr. Paul Fricke from the University of Wisconsin, looking at body condition. I think it really drives home why I'm pretty nervous about this. What they did, they went out into Wisconsin, into some commercial dairy herds, several thousand cows that were in these herds, and they looked at 3 different changes in cows during the transition period or after calving. They grouped them into cows that lost weight, cows that maintained body condition score, and then cows that gained body condition score. And so you can see the scores of these cows as you go across from basically 2.9 or 3 all the way up to 2.5 using their system. Body condition 21 days after calving, you can see the amount of body weight loss. This parallels some of Dr. Santos's data he shared with you a bit earlier. You can see those cows that lost body weight dropped about 4/10 of a body condition score, which is our maximum, by the way. Cows that maintained, and then cows that actually gained weight. And you'll say, how do they do that? Well, there was a trend, not statistical, that they did produce a little bit less milk, unfortunately, but certainly greater dry matter intake and maybe better management on the farm. But in the same farms, of course. The preg rate at 32 days after breeding. 13% of the cows are pregnant at that time period, with those cows that lost body weight. 33%, which is a great number in terms of those that maintain body weight and those that gain body weight, a whopping 47%. So there's a couple of really important take-home messages. To me, first of all, obviously body condition change can have impact on reproductive performance. This is not new science to you folks. You knew this already. But look at the scores. You can see these are modestly thin cows. So as a result, you can see those numbers are on thin side. And so we're targeting a body condition score of 3 at parturition. And then you can see how these cows reacted. Interesting set of data. Just thought we'd share that with you. There's more data there if you want to look at the study. So let's start wrapping this up by going to some Dutch data that I found in one of our publications recently. And we're looking at longevity. And this is something we got to get right in the US because we're in trouble here. And you can see in the US, we're getting about 2.7 lactations from our cows. Look at the New Zealanders, 4.2. Part of that is related to the pasturing system. Part of that is related to perhaps a lower level of milk production and less stress and challenges to cows. But look at the other countries here, quite well. Netherlands, excellent performance in Dutch areas, and you can see getting an extra lactation to my cows. So certainly a couple factors you'll see here in just a minute. Look at the milk yield. Here's that same data set that comes from Holland, and you can see the average milk production in first, second, third, fourth, and fifth lactation. And the take-home point is that if you're only going to have cows in the herd for 2+ lactations, they never reach the third and fourth lactation levels. That's a big number. That's a big number. How big is that number? Think about this. That if we look at milk per cow, milk per stall, might even better, that if I have my first lactation is in a stall and my fourth lactation cow is in a stall, that difference there is 9+ kilograms per day per cow per stall. Big number. So we have to get our cows to be in the herd longer. We have to start looking at tools that will allow us to increase longevity. Some of that will be genetic, some of that will be nutrition, some of that will be management on the farm. I thought we'd just share with you the most recent study I have on additive use, and you can look at that at your leisure. I will not read these numbers to you, but certainly our farmers are using additives. This is a Hordes Dairyman, a survey of their readers. So be well aware it's biased towards smaller herds coming from Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New York, because it's from the reader list. And they have many more people getting hordes, for example, in Wisconsin than in New Mexico because of a difference in herd size. But those are the different kinds of products you're going to see on the marketplace and farmers that are using it. So now we're going to go back to something that I'm going to call benefit to cost ratios. And there they are. You can see them listed. Remember, I want something over 2 to 1. And you can look down through those at your leisure. Silage inoculants, if you take that silage and put it through a high producing cow, that becomes 6 to 1 to 7 to 1. You already saw the one on rumen protected choline. I got 2 numbers down there for you. And now you know why there's 2 numbers there. It's 3 to 1 when I'm actually feeding the choline. However, if I look at the total lactation at milk yield only, that response is 14 to 1. And you saw that data presented earlier to you because the impact we had on peak milk and maintaining that performance over the entire lactation curve. So here are my products that I have for my close-up dry cows. I'm looking, you can read those at this point. I'm sure those of you in Europe can use the Monenzen boluses out there as well. And we'll certainly welcome any questions you may have on any of these recommendations on feed additives. For my fresh cows, the list changes a bit. Rumen buffers come back in because they basically will increase the DCAD, and we know under heat stress, higher DCAD, somewhere around 350 is where you want to be on these lactating rations under heat stress. Again, you'll see I've added in my calcium supplementation. There is some data that says Monenzen can actually be at a slightly higher level, can be a plus in terms of ketosis control and dry matter intakes, and you can read the rest of them as they go down the chart. So let's summarize. What are the key points that I would argue ROI on peak milk performance? Number 1, peak milk is critical. We only get to set it once, and the question is, Are you reaching those goals based on days in milk and parity? Got to calculate feed efficiency. I think it's a powerful tool, and it's got euros written all over it in terms of a return on investment. I think we got to control body condition score. And the problem I'm seeing is going back into the late lactation prior to going to the dry cow pen. With the controlled energy diets we now are using in the US, some of you call that the Goldilocks diet, we can really control body condition score in the dry pen, but the problem appears to be coming from the previous lactation. And then, of course, strategic use of feed additives, and of course, rumen-protected choline certainly falls nicely into that category. Well, let's go to our third area as my time is rapidly moving on here. And I'm going to look at something called right-sizing the heifer enterprise, and that's return on investment. So that's another key area I think we can make some real strides here in Illinois. Well, for some of you folks voting, this is your last time to vote in my presentation. So my question for those of you in Europe is, which one of these tools would you recommend and use? And again, all four of them are wonderful tools. The first one is genomic testing in the US. Probably about 20% of my farmers are doing that, genetic testing of heifers and cows. The use of sexed semen, again, a Wisconsin survey says about 20% in Wisconsin. Renewed emphasis on colostrum management and colostrum quality. And then finally, reducing the levels of culling on farms, increasing longevity, which means I just need fewer heifers on the farm on a replacement situation. So again, I think I've got this all figured out now, gang, so I can see kind of what you're doing here, and I can see the voting coming in. And again, in case of time, we never want to run late. It looks like we got half of you folks have voted. A few stragglers coming in slowly. I'm gonna challenge you. Come on, folks, let's get her done. And we are now going to look at it, and they are sharing the results. 10% of you say genomic testing. I like that. 9% using sexed semen. 44% colostrum management. Bingo. That's probably the most correct answer. But boy, I think in a close second, 37 of you picked reduced culling, which means fewer heifers on the farm. So we're going to close that window up here, and we should be ready to go here in 1 second. And I think we are off and running. Okay, so what do we have here in terms of cost of replacement heifers? This comes from the University of Wisconsin field extension staff people, and every 6 or 7 years they go out and actually survey small farmers, large farmers, and commercial heifer growers. And you'll see in 2015 the cost of raising a heifer, $2,500. That's everything. And they go to the farm and they collect the data. This is not a mail-in survey. So they have over 100 farms in this survey. And you can see the yellow one on the bottom, that's the calf value. Notice in 2015, $400. Now that should be probably $50. So you probably wouldn't even see that yellow line down there. So that's the sad news. The blue bar indicates what does it cost to feed the milk replacer to this calf for the first 6 to 8 weeks after birth. It's a very expensive time period. And then the large red bar, of course, is basically from 8 weeks until that heifer is ready to enter the milking herd, and that's significant as well. So certainly this is not a profit center, because remember, I can go out in the marketplace, and of course I don't know the genetics, but I can buy these for $1,200, $1,300. Okay, and we are going to move forward here once we get the machine to work with me and move it forward. And we are kind of stuck here, gang. Stay with me. For some reason, we are not moving forward. Maybe we can get some help here. I'm not quite sure what my problem is. Oh, away we go. Very good. So, yep, now we're working. Thank you very much for the help there. So the take-home message here is let's right size the heifer enterprise and what effects that has on return on investments. So only two big bullet points. Number one, not many farmers in Illinois are doing this, but what are you actually costing you to raise heifers on your farms with your forage, with your facility, and with your labor source? Number two, calculate the number of heifers you need. And the first question you need to ask or explore, and that is what's the culling rate? Trust me, if you're culling 40% of your cows every year, you need a boatload of heifers. Or are you in expansion mode? And of course, that's a take-home discussion. Should that be closer in the US to say 25 to 28% instead of 35, 36, which is fairly typical. Now, what kind of losses can you anticipate? Basically, 89% of those animals born alive. So the stillbirths are taken out of this equation. And in some farms, that can be a significant number. But 89% of the heifers born alive should enter the milking string. Where does that 89% come from? 3% would be pre-weaned calves in the milk replacement fit time period, 2% older heifers, and 6% infertile heifers. So that's where the 89% comes from. Excuse me again. Now you know you got two important answers: the culling rate or expansion, and then how many heifers is potential. So you can really back into how many you need to have on the farm, and then you put a small buffer in, maybe 10% in case something happens. So we got some wonderful tools. First is genomics, and a small percent of you selected that. That's getting the best, finding in your herd your best heifers and cows. Then go to sex semen and getting a 90% chance assured, pretty much assured, those heifers are going to be born from those animals, from those targeted animals. So I've got the best genetics coming into my herd, and then I'm going to use beef semen for those animals that I don't need as far as that goes. So we are in good shape at this point. So now we've got beef semen. And by the way, in the US right now, a beef on dairy, that's the term we're using, those animals are worth about $100 to $200 more compared to a Holstein calf. And of course, the Jersey calf has very little value, especially on the male side. So I'm not going to give you a colostrum talk. This PowerPoint from Wisconsin simply says that colostrum is more than just antibodies. It's kind of the gatekeeper. And so getting good colostrum management as a rich source of nutrients is probably one of the most important things that you and I can do for calf survival. Okay, now we look at some work that comes from Florida, and you had a hint of this a bit earlier in our discussions, looking at colostrum yield, and that's becoming a bigger question. Wanting to get more colostrum from my animals. We think metabolizable protein could be one of the answers, and maybe photoperiod or day length could be another one. But you can see with choline supplementation, we get an increase in milk yield. And then if you look at the quality of the colostrum, that is statistically significant. You can see we have higher levels of IgG, that is your antibodies in that colostrum milk. And that means we just have more opportunity to increase blood levels in these naive calves on immunity per se. They then also bled some of these calves, and sure enough, the calves did absorb higher levels of serum total protein. You can see there, in fact, both of them are pretty good numbers, but a significant increase with the supplement of choline. And so that has a value as well, which I did not use on my return on investment, but you can do that at your leisure if you want to look at those benefits as well. Here are some interesting numbers. We want to have healthy calves. That colostrum becomes a key player in it. The two big concerns in the US are scours. The guideline is less than 10%. A scouring would be a good guideline. How many of your dairy farmers really know that number? Boy, that's really powerful to know. And the data would suggest, coming from the Heifer Growers Association, that this occurs in the first 14 days of age is the most critical time, and that's a 2.5 greater risk that this animal will be culled at some point in her career. There is some benefit in that the intestinal lining can recover over time. Now let's look at the other one, respiratory diseases, primarily pneumonia. And that should be less than 15%. And those are big numbers, but these are the guidelines. And the question is, well, what is that number on your farm? And again, the data would suggest 4% less milk in first lactation cows, 8% less milk in second lactation cows. So there's a milk loss here as well. Here's a scary one, permanent damage to the lung tissue. So the Wisconsin Veterinary College suggests that calves that had 2 or more incidences of respiratory disease should be culled immediately. Don't put them in your heifer rearing program because they are eventually going to cause less milk and perhaps have more challenges, especially under stress conditions such as heat stress. So let's take a look at our return on investments on heifers. Basically, you can see we are wanting to right size number of heifers. There are your tools listed there. Health records on calf, and maybe that's the big one I really would challenge you to take home from this phase of the presentation. Do we have that data on dairy farms? And then, of course, colostrum management, both in terms of quality and quantity. Well, my time is gone. I want to wrap you up here, and my apologies for a few of those little glitches that I had to work through with you, but you're not talking to an IT expert here. Take-home messages. I'm going to look at focus on all three of the transition programs, and I snuck the far-off dry cow in there, but certainly far-off dry cow, close-up and fresh cows and groups and or strategies. That may be a top dressing strategy on some of our smaller farms. I think I've really stressed peak milk, and that's going to become more important here in the US and Europe because it's going to impact methane production. If you look at methane production per unit of dairy product, be it kilos of milk or kilos of cheese, high cows always going to win that one. You're going to really monitor the calf enterprise, control the controllables. I think that's another message, is that we can argue all we want about the price of corn or the price of electricity on farms or seeds. The point is you can't do much about that, but you can control such things as genetics on the farm, culling, and management factors, and use all the available tools. So with that, Scott, I'm done. Hopefully we haven't gone over here. I think we may have a time if there is a question